Hello, this is Leslie Celine with Getting a Grip, and today we have the pleasure of the company of Linda Kay. She and I met in Bridge Feltis Remember Institute anti-racism training, and I think that she has some interesting things to reveal to us. So, Linda, were you born without sight, or did something happen, or?
Yes, my brother and I were both born totally blind. And for a long time, there was no certainty as to what had caused our blindness. And we were born in the 60s. Yeah, I'm old. So we were born in the 60s. And my father was in the military at the time. So, of course, my parents availed themselves of all the testing that was available. And I was born first. And they basically told my mom and dad, she's a fluke, go ahead and have more kids, you'll be fine. So my brother was fluke number two. And then they started thinking, oh, something's not right here. But there was no previous blindness in our family. There didn't seem to be a genetic. Both my parents were sighted. Several years later, it came to light that Love Canal, and I don't know, this may be one of those Google things for people, but Love Canal was a place in Niagara Falls where essentially chemicals were dumped, and they were buried underneath a school, and there was a neighborhood, that basically where kiddos played. My mom pretty much lived on top of this chemical dump. So my parents got involved in litigation and all of that, which was interesting
Is
as
that
a
the
teenager.
one in the movie that's out recently, The Dark Waters?
I have
Or is
not.
different?
Yeah, it might. I will have to. I'm not sure because I haven't really looked into that movie. But um, so it was one of the first. We started to. It kind of came to light in the mid '70s, but it had happened like I think in the '40s, and so my mom and all of the women that she hung out with, all her girlfriends, each of them had a child with a significant disability. So it was one of those things where even after testing, they couldn't say for absolutely certain, but my mother had a lot of health issues and died at age 45, and my brother and I were born blind. So the kind of consensus is that my mother's exposure to those chemicals may very well have caused our blindness. I'm absolutely certain it caused her illness and early death. But so yeah, you didn't ask all that, but
Wow,
yeah,
that's an amazing story.
yeah, it's my mom's story, and I actually for a long time, part of the reason I'm a little bit not as knowledgeable maybe as I should be is that it's a part of my story that I didn't really want to talk about for a really long time. It was just a part that I just kind of like didn't want to deal with that because my parents' involvement in the litigation that really changed the trajectory of my teenage years. And then finding out that I might, if I had kids, they could be blind. And so it was kind of stuff that I didn't want to deal with. But in the past few years, I've kind of felt that my mom's story, she's not here to tell her story, but I do share more of that because she paid a high price for some really shitty behavior on the part um, of what do we want to call it of large corporation. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So how old were you when she passed?
I was 25. Yeah.
So growing up, you had your mom and you had your brother too?
Yeah,
Like there
I
were two
had,
of
yeah.
you?
Yes. So I had both my parents. I was blessed. My mom had me, she was one of those ladies back in the, that had kids early. So I was very blessed. She died at 45, but she had me when she was 20. So I was blessed to get to grow up with her. I really didn't. I mean, of course, I knew she died young, but as you get older, as I got older, I'm like, wow, she was really young. She had so much more life to go. And so, yeah, but it was my brother and I are 2 years apart. And so we grew up as two totally blind kids with two-sided parents. And we're still pretty close. We fight and everything just like we did when we were kids, but we're also really close. So.
And did you go to regular school or different school or?
Most of the time, I went to public school. There was 1 year where I went to school, uh, to the School for the Blind in Ohio. It was actually my choice to go, and I went there for 1 year, and I hated it. So I came back home. But the funny thing was, I wanted to go. My parents didn't want me to go. Then I went, and then when I wanted to come back, they didn't want me to come back. So I was like,
did your brother go too?
No, he did not. One of the things, unfortunately, that I found when I went to the school was that there was not like I was in seventh grade and I was in a class with maybe 25 kids, and all the kids had different abilities. There were multiple disabilities going on. So when I came back to eighth grade, I was behind. It was almost like I didn't go to seventh grade. So unfortunately, at that time anyway, I can't say this is true now, but at that time, the education, what I learned in seventh grade wasn't what everybody else was learning in seventh grade. So on the other hand, it was good. Like as far as blindness skills, I got a lot of that in the school and some other things that anyway, learned some other little things.
But you must have learned Braille when you were very small.
Very little. Yes, I was 5 when I was introduced to Braille, and I love Braille. I'm an avid Braille reader. My brother is a Braille reader also, but not as avid. I just gobbled up books as a kid, and my brother was like, "Yeah, I know Braille," but I loved it. And to this day, although it is harder to get hard copy Braille books, I still love connecting with Braille.
Is he more of an audiobook guy?
Oh yeah. He's all yeah. And I do too now. I do Kindle. I read. My phone is so full of books. I'm constantly reading, and I don't have as much hard copy Braille, but there are Braille displays where you can actually read on your phone. So I still, people often ask me if Braille is going to be obsolete, and I don't believe so. I think the way we interact with Braille will change, in that we'll maybe be interacting more with Braille displays as opposed to hard copy books. And I have to say, I've heard this from other friends who love books, that there's something about just holding a book in your hand. I don't know if you feel that, but I just love to hold a book. Yes. Yeah.
And so do you have a dog?
Yes, my brother and I both have, we have dogs from Seeing Eye. I have Abby and he has Patrick. And I've had dogs since I was 20, and we won't ask how many years that's been.
So when you were little, you didn't?
No. Pet dogs, but not a Seeing Eye dog.
And how do you can travel everywhere like that? And how does it make life different?
Well, I was not a good cane traveler. I sucked at cane travel. I still do, like utterly suck. And so when I was younger, orientation and mobility instructors, those were people that teach you how to get around from place to place. And they said, we think you need to go get a dog. And my parents were like, shit, no, because I lived at home for a little while. Until I was, I think I was, it wasn't long after I got my first dog that I moved into my own apartment. But at the time, my parents were like, no, we don't need a big dog and blah, blah. So I persevered and got my first dog. And I still struggled a bit with direction. I think even if I were sighted, I'd be one of those people that couldn't find my ass out of a paper bag. But when you're blind and you can't find your ass out of a paper bag, that is that makes life very interesting. So having the dog really helped with my confidence, and it's a team. You know, you're working together, and it's not like you just put the dog on autopilot. You and the dog are having to work together, and some dogs work very well with people who maybe struggle a bit with directions, and other dogs are kind of like, ooh, this person doesn't know where the fuck they're going, so we're going to go where I want to go.
Which kind is yours?
Oh, the one I have now, Abby, is very placid. Honestly, she is she's a wonderful beast, but we kind of we call her Abby the hugging pup, because she's a good guide, and she wants to please, but really what she wants to do is she has this amazing ability to know when people need her and when they're hurting, and she wants to hug. That's, out of harness, of course, but that's really her vocation. So she is a good guide. Unfortunately, the 2 years of COVID kind of knocked the stuffing out of her. So we're looking at, she's 8 years old now. So we're at that point where, not that I'm going to retire her tomorrow, but you reach that point where you start assessing and trying to determine when the best time for the pup to retire is. And that's a really, really hard and complex choice.
And then when they retire, do you keep them?
It depends. The school that I go to is really cool. Some schools have a say in what you do. The school I go to is, we own so every school is a little bit different, but the school I go to, excuse me, we own the dogs once we walk out the door with them. So it's up to us to either decide if we want to keep them, to find a home for them, or to send them back to the school. But sending an elderly dog back to the school it's not something I've ever had to do. There are people that's what they have to do, and so I don't judge that. But I've always I've either rehomed my pups, or one of my dogs I did keep, and she lived to be 15 and a half. So.
And do they let the dogs in the Uber and in the restaurants and everywhere?
Well, theoretically, we don't want to say Uber. Yeah, so theoretically, yes, dogs are permitted into public places. Unfortunately, Uber is a whole other. You could do a whole show on that. Okay. Uber and Lyft, not just Uber. All the services, the apps are there. There's a lot of difficulty in the communities where people have any type of service dogs, and so technically, because Ubers and Lyfts are providing a public service, they are supposed to allow the dogs into their cars. However, what they do, the real experience is, and this has happened to me and many others, they'll pull up, see you have a dog, and then they'll cancel your ride and book ass away and leave you, stranded. So yeah, there's the theoretical what should happen, and then what does happen in some cases.
So how did you get into anti-racist work? Like, first of all, how does race occur for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a child, the school that my brother and I first went to was a public school that had what they called at the time a resource room. So it was a class where the blind children could get their skills training, learn their Braille, and then we would go into other classes. Like, we would join our peers for the rest of the time, the rest of the day. And at that time, it was considered sort of cutting edge because at that time, most children went to the state schools. And actually, my parents moved to Ohio largely because they had heard about this particular school. But my brother and I were exposed to people from lots of backgrounds, lots of income, different incomes, different backgrounds, different from
Did
ours.
people come from all over to be at this school?
Yeah, so we were because we actually lived in a suburb, but we went to school in the city. And so, there were children from, especially the blind and visually impaired children came from, all over the city. So we had kids who, whose life was very different from ours. But, as kids, we didn't, we just were like, okay, that's what that is. I remember one of my friends, one of my friends at the time talking about, she said, oh yeah, we had to take a chair out of our house because there was a rat in it. And, I go home and tell my mom, and my mom's like, whoa, don't talk about that. And so we had Black and brown teachers, and we knew that, but it wasn't really, it was just like, okay, yeah, I know Mrs. Jackson's Black. Okay. But what started to happen was we started hearing other white people talking about, for example, my teacher, Mrs. Jackson, we liked her because we liked her. And I would hear little whispers of people saying, Mrs. Jackson's just angry and she's, and I'm like, what? So we started, things kind of started creeping in. And I don't know how much oh well, what the hell, you can always decide to edit this or not use it. So as we got older, we there was a young man who came to our school who was Black, and at the time, my brother and I were just, he was cool, he was one of the cool kids. And my father had kind of issues. This person had been shot in his neighborhood, and came from what my parents thought was not a good situation. And basically, my parents thought that he was a bad influence on us, whatever. But of course, when your parents think somebody's a bad influence on you, then you're just more like, oh, okay. And so we started to love music by Black artists. We just did. It was just a natural thing. And so there, at the time, there was this radio station that was a Black-owned station called WDAO, and my brother and I liked it because we liked it. And I remember my dad saying, "You can only listen to it for an hour a day," and I'm like, "What? Okay." So that was something later on in life my brother and I talked about, and we're like, "Okay." It was just so. As we got older, we started to see, because people often will say, oh, you're blind, you don't see color, which is, a really stupid thing to say. But it in a sense, we did, but we didn't, and then we started to hear and to be a part of what other people were saying and how other people were interacting. So then I go to high school in the suburbs, and there's like maybe two Black individuals, around. And so we were mostly with white people. So for a lot of my life, it was just not something I gave a huge lot of thought to. I was just kind of in my own world. And I can't say what caused me exactly to start to kind of wake up and give a shit. But I did, and a lot of things happened. Some of them were part of my spiritual growth. The other part was an interesting thing. My brother and I started a podcast where we were talking about film. We loved to talk about film, and one of the first films we talked about was the film from eons ago called A Patch of Blue, starring Sidney Poitier, and he befriends a blind white woman. And part of the reason we picked that film was because that was the first blind character I had ever seen as a kid. and as a kid, I hated that movie. Like I hated that fucking movie. Like, but then I kind of got reconnected with it. And so as my brother and I were starting our podcast, I was like, okay, I want to write about this, I want to write about blindness, but oh shit, we can't talk about racism because I don't know what the fuck I'm doing and we'll fuck it up. And oh my God, well, you can't take a movie like A Patch of Blue and not talk about racism. So it's a weird thing. I kind of consider it, I consider it kind of my Holy Spirit moment, that was God using that silly movie, to kind of get me to sort of wake up. And then I happened to connect with Bridge, and we did some work. And honestly, part of I kind of feel like I'm rambling, but it's hard not to ramble because I think that's it. It's all these pieces. Yeah. But one of the things that started to happen for me was I have, as part of my own kind of trauma bullshit, I have, like, when someone comes up to me and like grabs my arm or whatever, I mean, that's an inappropriate thing to do to blind people. But for me, it was more than that. It was really, like, I would almost just like freeze. So when Bridge and I were working on that, I realized that one of the things I did not want to do was I didn't want my anxieties to be a situation where I would ever put a Black person, particularly a Black man, at risk. Does that make sense? Yes. Because of how I react. And I was like, oh man, fuck, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be, because obviously then I'm starting to hear the stories and I'm like, I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person.
Right. Yeah. Not like there's random white reactivity that turns into an aggressive situation.
Yes.
That we don't necessarily know we're doing. Yeah.
And then I think I started to realize, then I was, looking at my own, at disability, at some of my shit, the more Bridge and I kind of uncovered some of my shit, then the more I was able, I think, to care about what was happening to other people. So I know that's a rambling sort of.
No, because it's like from the get-go, you noticed at first when there was economic class disparity.
Yes.
And so you would have noticed much later if there weren't.
Right.
And then it sounds like it's just something other people made you aware of. Like you start to realize there's some extra.
Yeah.
Do you hear it in someone's accent, or like, can you recognize an Asian American by the way they speak, or?
To an extent, but I'm going to tell you, I thought I was like the shit when it came to that, but I learned that I'm not as good as I think I am. So yes, that certainly, listening to voice can be a cue, but it's not the end all be all. And there have been times when I thought I knew what I thought I knew and I didn't.
So, yeah. And so you said when you started understanding your own stuff, then there was more compassion flowing through you.
Yeah.
And you're talking specifically about marginalization.
Yes. Yeah. And I really did spend a lot of years, not that I wasn't, I of course I knew there was racism, just like I knew there was ableism, but I kind of spent a lot of my years. In fact, I joked with Bridge and said, gosh, I wish I was the person I am now, like when I was 25 or 30. and so it's like, I'm sorry it took me in my 50s to find my voice and to give a fuck. But I also know
it's wasted on the young, right?
Yeah. But I also know that probably even that time when I thought I was kind of like asleep, if you will, I know that I was still learning. I just, so it's not like there was awareness, but I think it took doing some of my own healing before I could make room for the idea of using my voice, not only using my voice, listening. Because sometimes there's a time to use your voice and there's a time to shut the fuck up and listen. So
What do you wish people knew? Like, what is it that people don't get that you wish they would?
Do we have 10 hours? No, I'm just kidding. Well, first of all, I think, and my brother and I are a great example because we grew up in the same family. We're both blind. We were both born blind, but we're two individuals. We like different things. We have different political views. It's always kind of cool when he and I can speak together, which is why I liked doing our podcast, because this is like a mini example of the fact that, you know, you can have two people who are Black and female. You can have two people who are Asian and male, whatever, but that's part of who they are. So my blindness is a part of who I am. It's not a part that I hide. Obviously, I can't. It's not a part that I'm ashamed of, but it's one piece of who I am. And it's one piece that makes up who I am. And that each of us are very different. We're not a monolith. And I think this is something I suspect that many people in marginalized communities struggle to get across. And the other thing that I really, one of the things I see as I travel this, you know, just out in the world, when I see people fuck up, most of the time it's because, number one, they don't ask. And then when they do ask, they don't fucking listen. And it just makes me like, oh my God. And the biggest thing is, so to just kind of put it into an example, you know, I talked about touch earlier. And in my case, I did have some trauma issues around touch, but this is a separate issue in that there are often people who will just walk up to a person with a disability, particularly blind people, and grab their fucking arm.
Really?
Like, did you not learn when you were 2 that you don't touch people without proof? I mean, toddlers get this, and adults will just grab you. And
they think they're being helpful, or they just...
yes. They absolutely think they're being helpful. Yeah. And so now it doesn't happen as much to me because I have a dog, but it does happen to us. And I even have family members that I have to still say, will you stop? And there's a whole lot of, I believe there's a whole lot of reasons why that happened. And some of them I think are not even really conscious, but the bottom line is, if you feel you want to help someone or you feel someone needs their help, before you do anything, you ask. Now, that's obviously, if you see someone about to fall down the stairs, that's a whole different, because people will say that to me. They're like, well, what if you're going to fall over a cliff? When the fuck are we going to be? Come on. So, people, well, if I think you're going to die, okay, fine. But Jesus, I'm not going to die when I'm just walking and you just want to steer me in a different direction. And so what will happen is, someone will grab your arm or try to lend some other assistance, maybe when you haven't even asked. Now, I do want to be really clear about this. I do not, there's enough lack of compassion in this world. So I absolutely don't want to discourage people. Like, I don't want to say to someone, well, if you see someone and they look like they need help, just be like, fuck you, I'm just gonna stay on my way. I don't. But what to anyone, the first thing you do is ask if help is needed, and then ask what kind of help, and then listen to the answer. But we don't do that. And I'm not going to say that just because I'm disabled doesn't mean that I have this book in my head of how to deal appropriately with other disabilities, because I fuck up just with the best of them. So that's a big thing. And I think that really if people could just calm down and ask and listen, I think we would avoid a large part of the mishaps and missteps that we make.
Right.
And that goes for me too, because I don't, when I'm talking, I try really hard to be careful not to just act like I'm just, bitching out everybody else, because I promise you, I make mistakes like everyone else, and we don't want to mess up. Most of us don't. Most of us genuinely really do want to add goodness and decency to the universe. We don't want to be, most of us are not out there like, let's see if I can fuck with this blind person. But like I said, even with, I have one particular family member who, God love her heart, she just can't, she's a healthcare worker. And part of it is that she's used to working with patients where she's, manipulating their body. She's an occupational therapy assistant. And so she just is a grabby kind of person. And I'm just, and someone has said to me, because I post about this a lot, and people will say, well, you need to give people grace. Absolutely. There are some people that I understand, I don't just go screaming, ranting at people. I really do try to educate, but there are times when someone grabs you and can inadvertently put you in danger, because if you grab someone who's walking, especially now that I'm getting older, you can actually throw us off balance. And when the person's working with the dog, I liken it to grabbing a steering wheel of a car. So, yeah.
Oh, because the dog could react in a protective manner.
Well, or just get really confused, like, wait, why are you grabbing my person? What are you, are you doing my job for me now? Yeah. And then I think the other, when I think about, like, for example, employment, unfortunately, the employment numbers for blind and visually impaired people are still quite abysmal. And there's still, there's all these little microaggressions that happen. And then you have the big things like employment. And I think what happens to people sometimes is, it's kind of like if you keep getting bitten by mosquitoes, after a while, you're going to get real, it's like, God, one more fucking mosquito. So I think sometimes, because there are people who are like, who will say to me, you're so angry all the time. You're so pissed all the time. And I'm like, no, I'm not. But honestly, there are some days where you start your day and by 10 o'clock, you've already had to tell 3 people, educate 3 people. And so then when you get to the big shit, like employment, that gets hard. So I always tell people, if you are dealing with a person with a disability and they seem kind of pissy or just you feel like they're overreacting, imagine that they're living in a world where they're constantly having to maybe reiterate their autonomy. There are people who have to fight to keep their children because of disability. So there's a whole lot of shit going on out there, but it's not all bad. And I do try to, sometimes on my Facebook page, I think, God, people probably think all I do is bitch and whine. But I do like to educate, and I do use humor, and then sometimes it's just fun to bitch on my page.
Well, I find it educational because there's, things you run into that I would never think of.
Yeah. And I just think, the other thing is too, you can, a lot of times when someone is doing the best they can, and they really do want to, quote, help. I almost kind of, that word is kind of annoying, because sometimes helping is leaving someone alone. But
right.
But I, for people who ask me questions and who are curious, I think curiosity is big. And I think about it in terms of, we were talking about race. And of course, just like people dealing with me as a disabled woman, I am also often thinking, oh, fuck, if I say something or ask a question of a Black person, I'm going to fuck this up. I'm going to ask the wrong thing, which is why, it's
Oh yeah,
been,
people have that
working.
about
Yeah.
disabled people too. Yeah, all the time.
Yeah. And that's why the space, with Bridge was great because, yeah, we could be told, yeah, you might want to reframe that or,
Yeah,
but it's a place to get, I think, as she says, be brave, not necessarily safe, but, step out and know you're going to fuck up.
yeah. So it sounds like, may I ask you a question? Would be the first step.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be like before we started recording, you kind of, I think, wanted to check out some boundaries.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah. And everybody's not gonna, one of the things that happens is sometimes if someone knows me and then they meet another blind person, they can't assume, for example, I identify as a blind woman, but there are other people who will say, I'm a woman who's blind or I'm visually impaired or whatever. And that's another thing, oftentimes if we listen to how someone, because I get caught up in that. I'm thinking, oh shit, does somebody want to, are they black? Are they African American? What the fuck? But sometimes if I just listen, then, I hear.
People
Um,
let you know, yeah.
yeah.
And do you have like a somatic sixth sense? Like, do you have another way of finding out where people are spatially?
Um, my spatial skills suck. I kind of think my brother and I have talked and we kind of think that, again, because we grew up in the 60s and 70s, we think that there may have been some um what's the right word, that we may not have been neurotypical, but it wasn't necessarily caught. And so
Right.
in retrospect, I think that some of my struggles might have been some cognitive issues that we didn't necessarily know about. And so that in addition to blindness, made things a little, and so one of them for me was being spatially aware. But I think the other part of that, and a lot of my work with Bridge was, some of the work that we did helped me to be able to be more confident in my own body space. And when I started to be able to do that, then I was able, I think, to be more aware. Because Bridge used to always tell me, she's like, girl, you can't walk around and be like all in the clouds and in dreamland. You got to know what's going on around you. You're blind. You got to know what's going. And so sometimes that would be what I would kind of go into my own world, because of anxiety. And so once I kind of dealt with a lot of that, I think that now I am much more aware of my surroundings, much more aware of who might be beside me, but I also don't necessarily feel fear, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that work was really, really helpful. And ironically, when I started with Bridge, I started with her thinking that, we were just going to deal with, my desire to do anti-racism work. And all of a sudden we're dealing with my shit because we had to deal with that first. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this sucks at first.
All
Like,
about
no.
emotions.
Yeah.
And what role does spirituality play in your life?
It's actually, I guess it always has played a large role in my life, but I wasn't always aware that it did. I think I've always been a person that, because it was strange, because as a young person I would have people who would meet me and they would be like, oh, you're so spiritual, and I'd be like, huh, the fuck, no. um but what has happened recently for me is that, I am a practicing Christian, but I'm also a practicing Christian who loves to cuss and other things that maybe some people wouldn't, necessarily align with Christianity. And I've just gotten more like, okay, but that's who I am. this is who I present to God, and God already knows that. So yeah, I I kind of walk my own path. It does mean that I don't always fit, like I don't fit neatly into churches. And even when I was working with Bridge, I was like, I don't quite fit here because I'm a Christian with a lot of people who are not. And, maybe that's not gonna, I may not feel like a safe person to them. But what I found was people just accepted me as the whole of who I was. So I'm not sure if that answered your question. I kind of babbled around about that, but yeah.
Well, to you, it's about community.
Yes. Yeah. 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 But it also means being okay with um not necessarily. I think a lot of times when people think about spirituality, then they think about religion and they think about, oh, I'm going to find this community and I fit perfectly, which none of us ever do. But I think one of the things I've learned over the past few years is I can be in a lot of different communities, but I have to be very careful that I don't hide pieces of myself.
Yeah. Has that happened in Christian communities?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as a matter of fact, my brother and I just did a brief little talk at our church about disability and faith. And when we were finished, my pastor kind of looked at us, and I think more at me than my brother, and said, well, at least no F bombs were dropped. Like, I wonder who she was looking at.
Well, yeah. I mean, what role does faith play in your walk in life?
Yeah. Well, what we were talking about was it's very difficult. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit trail, but it's very difficult. One of the things I'm in my own work right now that I'm looking at is Christianity and how we white people have used Christianity to do horrendous things to other individuals. And in terms of race, in terms of disability. And so I'm doing a lot of reading in that area and kind of immersing myself in that. And it's hard. And one of the things that my brother and I talked about, excuse me, when we were talking to our little church of really old people, was very sweet little people, but we had to be careful not to overdo it, but to talk about how it can be very difficult to be a Christian and maybe a person of other faiths too, and deal with how disability is addressed. In the Bible, the whole miracle,
Wow.
Jesus healing the blind dudes and all that. And so that's a and I love that I have a pastor who's cool about pulling that apart and acknowledging that reading the Bible as a disabled person can not always feel really good. So and the same with race. So yeah, and that's hard work to do because it's like, okay, I'm a Christian, but then when you look at how people have used Christianity and I'm sure other faiths too, to justify horrific acts against other people, that's hard shit to look at, really. And it's like, okay, what do I do with this?
And at the same time, do you find that your faith helps you get through the day in some way?
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's because it's my, like I will sit and there are times when I like will lament. One of the recent things lately for me has been one of the things that has really been a struggle for me has been watching how disabled people were pretty much thrown under the bus during COVID, and I would just sit and cry and lament to God and cuss. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm cussing and I'm talking to God. And I'm like, but you know what? God knows that's in my heart anyway. And that's the most real prayer for me. And when I'm just saying it, yeah, like what?
And
Yeah.
maybe tell us, for people who aren't aware of what happened to disabled people during COVID.
Well, lots of things, but basically when we first became aware of COVID, social media is one of those things that it's a blessing and a curse. So when I'd be on social media and I would see disabled people who were absolutely terrified because they would say, oh, this is back when people were, if you got COVID, there was a high chance you were going to end up on a ventilator, especially if you had comorbidities, and people were afraid. They would say, I'm afraid I'm going to go to the hospital and I'm going to be one of the people that they're going to decide isn't worthy of living. And what I think, who cares what I think, but I feel like what happened with COVID was a lot of the stuff, it wasn't new stuff. We eugenics is alive and well, and so we, and I know that's not something people want, but I think
No,
what
that's
happened was,
important to hear.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think what COVID did is it just pulled all that shit out into the light. And even now, there are people who, I know people who are immune compromised, and while everybody's running around, oh yay, I can go to Wally World and not wear my mask, and I have some immune compromised friends who, they're getting out the best they can, but they're terrified. And so I think that basically what happened was we kind of, as a society, said we're willing to sacrifice certain people, our elderly, our disabled, and I want to say that went up as far as the government. But like I said, I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole. But
No, it's a deeply held belief, and it's one of those
yeah.
that's in the body and the emotions, like you found, like we all find when we examine it. But yeah, for me it was really shocking. I'm immune compromised, and to hear people say things like, well, they would have died anyway.
Yeah. Oh.
And I'd be like, well, fuck you. You're gonna die right now. You know what I mean? Like,
right. Yes. Yeah. It's heartbreaking. And I was really pissed when my church basically said, basically followed, the CDC guidelines and stopped asking for masks. And we had several immune compromised people in our church. And, I said what I had to say to the pastor, and I said what I had to say to the elders, and they all said, thank you very much. But, and it's, I hoped for better in our faith communities, but the reality is, our faith communities are part of the larger world, and they're made up of people. So I just, and I often have thought to myself and even said to people, I think that oftentimes, I don't know how this feels for you, but I feel like sometimes people who are immune compromised almost are like, well, we're not even going to talk about it anymore. And I guess every opportunity I have, if someone shares a story, then I want to share it. And I want people to know that those voices might be quieter, but they're out there. There are people who are out there, and, COVID's not done with us. So, but yeah.
Mm. I saw what I thought was more disabled homeless people than I'd ever seen in San Francisco this time.
Yeah.
When I went to renew my passport, I was shocked at how many homeless in wheelchairs there were. And I was like, okay, did they need the wheelchair before? Now they have it? Or is this a whole new crop of disabled homeless people?
Right. Yeah. And with COVID, with so many people who are disabled as a result of having had COVID, then you've got that added to the mix. And I know that in the work I do, we have people just calling all day for all kinds of needs that our agency doesn't provide, but people are just calling everywhere. And being homeless right now, it used to be people didn't imagine that disabled people could be homeless. I'm like, yes, they can be. And now, the homeless shelters are trying to figure out, how do we take in, people with disabilities? And oftentimes when I say disabilities, I mean people who really need other kinds of care, but they can't get that care. And so the shelters are doing the best they can to take care of people. So I think that these past couple of years have just uncovered a bunch of shit that we kind of kept a little bit hidden, and now it's just out on Front Street. And what are we going to do about it, and how are we going to face it?
And is there anything good coming of that, or are we not there yet?
I do think, I mean, so when I got COVID 2 years ago and I came out of COVID, I was like this pissed off, like ranting, raving. I was so pissed at people for whatever, anybody who was an anti-masker or whatever. I was like, I mean, I was just enraged. And I found that I had to sort of like stop and realize many things. One was that, there were certain people who were just assholes. And then there were other people who, when you actually talked with them, their feelings were much more complex. And
Yes.
and I have been able to hear, I've had people reach out to me who have beliefs very different from mine with regard to vaccines and whatever, but we've been able to have talks and not rant and rave at each other, and that's okay. But I do think, yes, I do think that there are people who did step forward, who are stepping forward, who are seeing that, inequities. And I think that there were things that happened in COVID that, if we choose to, for example, one of the things that happened with COVID was, a lot more Zoom calls, which were a pain in the ass for a lot of people. But it also meant that disabled people, especially people who couldn't get out, could participate. So I think that if we choose to accept the gifts, and I don't want to say that COVID was a gift, but I think if we choose to accept some of the things that came out of what we did, to still connect with one another. I mean, it's still wonderful to connect, human to human, but I love that, you and I are chatting on Zoom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is it easier for blind kids today than it was for you in any way?
My brother and I have been talking about that, and we're not sure. In some ways, yes, but because there's a lot more technology, so little kids are learning just like sighted kids. You think, I don't know if you have family, they give their 2-year-old a cell phone, and so blind children have that technology. So young blind people tend to be very, very tech savvy. But one of the kind of sad things is that we're having to really fight for Braille for our young people. Yeah. And that's just, and a lot of parents have to fight for their children to be exposed to Braille.
So there's a school of thought that would phase it out in favor of the audiobook.
Yeah, in favor. Yeah. And, for me, and I'm not saying that you can't ever learn to spell or whatever, using audiobooks, but I know that my ability to spell and to put words together was greatly impacted by the fact that I had a connection with Braille through my hands. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for Kindle and all that stuff, but I would never trade my Braille for anything. And I think that if children are visually impaired to the point where they may lose their sight, and I think that they absolutely should be exposed to Braille, but it is something that parents often have to fight very hard to make sure that kids have that knowledge.
Well, Linda, I've learned so much just in this short
This
time.
has been fun. We just been just shooting the shit. It's been
Yeah.
great. You are
Let's
a
do
wonderful
it again
interviewer.
sometime.
Yeah, you are an awesome interviewer. And thank you so
I'm
much.
learning. Thank you. I'm gonna stop the recording.
Okay.